Japan's format is continuing to evolve even after, a couple of weeks of battle partners being legal and their new rotation. We've had some new decks pop up here and there as they slowly climb their way up the tower of tier list, and we've even had some new decks come into the fray that previously were known about, but they didn't do very well, and now they are doing even better. One of those decks is a card that I've actually talked about quite a while ago when it was first announced, all the way back in Stellar Crown. In the post-rotation format, this deck and this card are actually doing pretty decently. That card being Slowking. This is a 120 HP Psychic type Pokemon with the Seek Inspiration attack. It does have a second attack, but that isn't worth talking about because Seek Inspiration is just that much more powerful. For one Psychic and a Colorless, it says discard the top card of your deck, and if that card is a Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box, choose one of its attacks and use it as this attack. So already this opens up a lot of choices and possibilities for what you could use. Granted, it does say Pokemon that don't have a rule box, so you can't use EX or V Pokemon or even Radiant Pokemon, so on and so forth. But even then, there are still a lot of Pokemon in the game that have very, very strong attacks. Granted, they do have some downsides to them, for example having a high energy cost, or being on a stage 2 Pokemon, or having specific conditions that they need to meet, so on and so forth. I'm going to go over the main examples that a lot of deck lists are playing, but if you guys can think of any more in the comments, then do let me know. We'll start off with the one that the deck is mainly making use out of, that being Kyurem from Shrouded Fable. Triforced for 2 water, 2 metal and 1 colorless, already a pretty hefty cost. That is already alleviated, does 130 damage to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon, but you have to discard all energy from this Pokemon. That doesn't really matter because it only requires a Psychic and a colorless, so already you can just attach and then make use of the deck's main support Pokemon being Xatu to attach Psychic energy from your hand, and not only that, but you get to draw 2 cards. So it gives the deck a little bit of consistency as well as an extra energy to fulfill Slowking's attack. But also, Slowking can make use of Reversal Energy, which says that if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, and this card is attached to an evolution Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box, it provides free energy of every type. So if you're behind on the game, say your opponent's taken a prize or 2, you can attach Reversal Energy to Slowking, and already its attack cost is completely filled, and if you use something like Kyurem, you just have to discard the 1 Reversal Energy. Being able to hit 110 damage on 3 of your opponent's Pokemon is very, very strong, especially considering we have quite a few evolution decks in the format. Dragapult, Goldengo, Charizard, Zoroark, Gardevoir, Feraligatr, Slowking itself, and also Archlodon. So you can easily take out 3 basic low HP Pokemon for 3 prizes, or you could ping maybe 3 EX Pokemon and then use Kyurem again to knock them all out if they have that low amount of HP, because there are quite a few EX Pokemon in the format that have 200 HP, maybe like 210, there are some that have 190 if not lower, so you could very easily use Kyurem twice and just win the game by taking all 6 prize cards depending on the deck that you're up against. Another good really partner that you can copy the attack of is Conkeldurr with its Gutsy Swing. It does 250 damage, which is a decent amount, and can knock out a couple of Pokemon depending on the matchup, but it's not enough to hit those high HP EX evolution Pokemon. Another Pokemon the deck can make use of is Regigigas from Prismatic Evolution. Jewel Breaker does 100 damage, but if your opponent's active Pokemon is a Terra Pokemon, it does 230 more damage, meaning that you can very easily one-hit KO any Terra EX Pokemon. Dragapult, Charizard are the main go-to examples, but even some support Pokemon like Ogerpon EX, which is seen playing quite a lot of decks, can easily be one-hit KO'd thanks to Regigigas. And then another partner that the deck has only started making use with is Annihilate from Surging Sparks with its Destined Fight attack. It says both active Pokemon are knocked out. So you basically trade with your opponent's active Pokemon. They're only going to take 1 prize card because you attack with Slowking, but you're going to take 2 prize cards. So if you're like approaching the end of the game, you only need 2 prizes left and you don't really have the resources left to maybe reuse something like Kyurem or Regigigas, you can instead use Annihilate. Now the main question you may be thinking is, how are you going to get these cards specifically on the top of your deck? We do have supporter cards like Cypher Maniac's Codebreaker, which says you search your deck for 2 cards, shuffle your deck and then put those cards on the top of the deck, so that can help. But the main cards that this deck uses is Night Stretcher for cards that you've already used, as well as its main stadium card, Academy at Night. The stadium says that once during each player's turn, that player may put a card from their hand on top of the deck. And granted that a lot of the attacks that you're copying are on evolution Pokemon, except for Regigigas and Kyurem, you obviously can't bench them as your active Pokemon at the start of the game, so they're just going to stick in your hand. So putting down Night Academy, you can put that Pokemon on top of the deck, and then you can attack with Slowking. You obviously discard that card and copy one of its attacks. And then once you've used that Pokemon, you can use something like Night Stretcher to get it back, and then use Academy at Night again to put it back on top of the deck so you can copy it yet again, making use of cards such as Ultra Ball so you can easily get out any Pokemon you want and then stack it on top of the deck. Or something like Lana's Aid, which actually put any combination of Pokemon that don't have a rule box and basic energy cards from your discard pile into the hand. And we also have Max Rod, that you can put 5 of any combination of Pokemon and basic energy cards from your discard pile into your hand. So it's basically Night Stretcher times 5. So you can not only get 1 Pokemon back to put on top of your deck, but you could also get another one for the next turn, another one for the turn after that, or even get back some energy cards for any Slowkings that have been knocked out. So this deck can make use of a lot of different things. It has stuff like Xatu, so it has an inbuilt draw engine that not only accelerates energy, it can make use of stuff like Badoo in case you want to slow down the game, but the Pokemon that this deck can use just piles up, and if we get any more with really good attacks that, you know, most decks won't be able to utilize, then you can easily just throw them into this deck. The only issue I can see with this deck is if you draw Kyurem or Regigigas at the start of the game, so now you have to put them in the active spot if you don't have another Pokemon. That's like the only type of downside I could see with this deck, but even then it's kind of not that bad, because if your opponent knocks them out, you can now just start recycling it and start using its attack. But not only that, you're going to be behind on the game, so you can make use of reversal energy and even other stuff like counter catcher, so you can bring up another Pokemon that you might want to knock out, so on and so forth. There are many different builds of this deck out at the moment using a plethora of different supporter cards, but the main Pokemon themselves remain the same. You don't really need to play multiples of each of these Pokemon because you can easily recycle them. Kyurem is the only one that you play 2 of because that's the main one that you want to see and the main one that you want to use and abuse. Other cards like Conkeldurr, Regigigas and Annihilate you only really play 1 copy of because they're there just in case you need them depending on the matchup. But again, Kyurem is the main card that you'll want to use, so that's why you play multiple copies of it. Because if you use Kyurem like 2 or 3 times, depending on the deck that you're up against, you can just win the game, right there and then. Say you're up against something like Raging Bolt, they have like 2 Teal Mask Ogerpons and a Squawkabilly on the bench. You use Kyurem, 110 damage to all 3 of them, and then you use Kyurem again next turn, and you just win. Because you're going to be knocking out 3 Pokemon EX, so you take 6 prize cards. There are a couple of like stun and stall Pokemon that could be very annoying for this deck, stuff like Toedscruel, but Toedscruel is only really seen playing in Iron Fawn's Dragapult, which isn't really seeing a lot of play at the moment anyway over in Japan because you mainly want to play Dragapult Pure. Only really like tough matchup I could see against this deck is maybe something like Dragapult, because it can easily ping 60 damage to maybe one of your support Pokemon on the bench. You maybe have a Badoo, or you have something like Xatu, or even another Slowking. You could easily just ping some damage onto it and easily pick apart your opponent's board. The deck is also, a little bit slow, I think, because you not only have 2 stage 1 Pokemon that you want to get into play, Slowking and Xatu, so you not only want multiples of them, but you also run the risk of, again, at the start of the game, drawing something like Kyurem, drawing something like Regigigas, so now they're in the active spot, and that might hinder your opportunities. There's also the possibility of prizing one of these Pokemon, so now you don't really have that many options against you. If you prize both Kyurems, unfortunately, then you're probably going to have to make use of something like Conkeldurr, unless you're up against a Terra EX deck in which you can use Regigigas. So at the moment, the deck does have a lot of tools tools at its disposal, and it is doing pretty well. It's like a very low mid-tier B deck at the moment. Its representation in like the top 16 of events over in Japan is like 2.5%, which is still pretty decent, and the deck has been winning and topping a couple of city leagues. In fact, it won one recently, but other than that, it has been seeing a lot of top spots here and there. And as we get more sets in the future, and as we get more Pokemon that the deck can easily use and abuse, its power level is only going to increase. The next upcoming set we have for Japan is Heat Wave Arena, so we'll have to keep an eye on that set if there's any other like random Pokemon this deck could use at its disposal. Attacks with like very high costs that you can easily mitigate thanks to Slowking's Seek Inspiration. And that is it for the video. I can't think of anything really else to say about this deck. It is a very fun, very interesting type of deck that I imagine will only get stronger as we get more cards in the future. Pokemon for the deck to easily use and abuse, to where other decks or other people may consider them to just be bulk cards that won't see any play. This deck might be able to put them to some use. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about Slowking. Will you be picking up this deck? Do you think this deck has the chance to shine in our current format? But do you think it's better to wait till next rotation in order to play this deck? Will you be picking up this deck? So on and so forth. Make sure to like, comment and subscribe, all of that nonsense, and I will see you in the next video, whatever that may be. Take care.